And if you go on our website, discerningtoday.org, you'll find some documentation there in which I describe what happened in Monterey, I describe what happened in other couple meetings in this last year. And you will be able to get to some of the original documents, and it will horrify you what they're actually planning in this particular situation. We also have a video out on this. I don't have it up here. It's called Destiny 21st Century Towards Global Financial Control. It's on in our booth on that first major row after you enter in the front doors. So you can look at that if you want to. It describes in detail what they're planning on doing with the global financial architecture. They're completely restructuring it. In 2 or 3 years, you will not recognize our international monetary system. They want to have everything centralized in a one world bank. It's not going to be called the World Bank as we know it now. It'll probably be organized through the IMF, and they'll eventually want a single currency. That's their ultimate goal. And that was all discussed in Monterey 6 weeks ago. Obviously, the next thing would be the standing United Nations Army. Bill Clinton was very supportive of this. President Bush has not said anything one way or the other, but that's coming. And we eventually believe it's going to give birth out of NATO. That NATO will become the world army. There's no other reason to have NATO around. The European Union is beginning to form its own military unit to defend Europe. There's no reason to keep NATO alive, and NATO will take on international flavors here within the next year or so.
Will Bush allow Russia to join NATO?
Will Bush allow Russia to join NATO? I don't know about Bush. I know Clinton was. In fact, there was very active discussion, and I'm going to get into that in a few minutes, very active discussion of bringing NATO or bringing Russia into NATO about 2 years ago. Eliminate or register all small arms. Of course, those who are involved in the Amendment 2 issue fully recognize the effort of the international movement to try to take all small arms away from private citizens. And of course, our Constitution forbids that, and you're right in pursuing that. I'm not going to say much more about it, but I'm 100% behind your efforts to keep the right to bear arms in the United States. It's a major thorn in their side, a major thorn. I'm being taped, so I can't answer questions. No, I can't do that. Otherwise, it'll take too long. An Economic Security Council. Not only do they want the 10 regions, economic regions, but they want to create an Economic Security Council itself, opposite the General Security Council. So it will have power to literally control the economy of the world. This is part of what they're planning on doing. Consolidating all international functions under the United Nations. The IMF, the World Bank, which are very close to the United Nations, are not part of the United Nations charters today. And as a consequence, what you're going to see very soon is a creation of a new economic security, consolidation of all these other international organizations. That's what all the riots have been at the trade organizations and the World Bank meetings and other things as we've gone around over the last 3 years of these tremendous riots where there's been even deaths involved as people are protesting globalism. What they don't realize is that the very people that are funding them to travel to these riots and protests and so forth are the globalists. They want to create agitation, they want to create division. It's the Hegelian dialect of creating a crisis where they come up with a solution that's different than what we have today. And that's exactly what they're doing. They want to fold all of these international organizations under the auspices of the United Nations, not so theoretically so that they're controlled by the United Nations, but let me assure you that the United Nations will not control them. They will control the United Nations when it's all over. They want to expand the 5 permanent members to 10. That will coincide pretty much with those 10 regions that we were talking about before. They want to end the veto power of the permanent members of the Security Council. So the United States doesn't have any more veto or doesn't have any more political power than any other nation, including the Sudan or whoever happens to be on the Security Council. They want to implement the International Criminal Court. As I mentioned earlier, the Criminal Court is now in law, and the International Criminal Court, fundamentally, it's very loosely written, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it will allow the international community to arrest any private citizen in the world at any time, including any American, even though we have not signed that treaty, for crimes against humanity. And let me assure you, each and every one of you, the fact that you're in this room and alive today are committing a crime against humanity because you're breathing. And you're exhaling carbon dioxide, and the Kyoto Protocol was just accepted about 6 months ago, and carbon dioxide is now a greenhouse gas and therefore not allowed. Now, you can laugh, and you can say that'll never happen, and it probably won't, but the fact is that technically all of us are in violation of these laws just by being alive. And therefore they can have an excuse, just like the old, it's structured exactly like the old Soviet legal system was, and they can come in and arrest you for anything they want to at any time and haul you before in The Hague in the International Criminal Court. Now, they're primarily going after leaders of the world, but the fact is you're part of this effort to try to stop this agenda, and they can potentially use this. I'm not saying they're going to, but they can potentially use the ICC, the International Criminal Court, to stop you. They want to forgive all the debt of the poor countries, and that first major step occurred just about 6 or 8 weeks ago with the forgiveness of about $150 billion with the 6 most poorest nations of the world. It's happening even as we speak. These types of things are happening. They want to eliminate poverty within 15 years. There's something like 2 or 3 billion people that earn less than $1 a day, and they want to eliminate that. Who are they going to pay for it? You and I. And force compliance of all UN human rights treaties that they're establishing, even though our Constitution is far superior to these. That's what they are intending on doing. Now, in the year 2001 and 2001 agenda. Now, these are actual agenda items that the United Nations pursued during those years. And the current one is a continuation of that, so I'm going to just use this one without getting into the year 2002. But the fact is, we'll just take a few of these. I don't have time to spend all of them. They want general and complete disarmament. That's what they're working on. They want to resolve the Mideast crisis, and of course, in these last few weeks, the United Nations has come forward and said that we have to send international troops into Israel to control what is going on. This is something that, and they voted again literally last week voted to condone terrorism on the part of the Palestinians in their fight for liberation. The globalization and developing of interdependence, of course, this is a key. The attack on our natural resource base in America is designed to force the necessity of buying oil, of buying products, timber, and other sundry things that you use on a day-by-day basis from the international market rather than homegrown, so that we become dependent on other nations of the world for our very survival, because once that happens, again, the Soviet Union set up the model for this. They distributed this factory over here that made the X widget, and that factory over there that made the Y widget for whatever product was being made in the third part of the Soviet Union, so that no one of their republics could ever be independent, and therefore they're trying to do the same thing on the international level. They want to also, let's drop down to number 9, solving the financial problem of the United Nations. That was attempted in Monterrey, Mexico, with the Tobin tax and other forms of taxation. They failed. I don't know what's going to happen on this particular issue now, but they failed in Monterrey, so expect something to happen on an international basis that will force this to happen. There will be something that develops in a crisis, an international monetary crisis of some sort, the only solution will be having the United Nations financially independent. The establishing the principles and the norms of international law within the new international economic order. This is establishing all the all the international laws, environmental, political, social, and so forth, so that everything is run out of the United Nations. To establish, by the way, these are not titles I made up. These came right out of the United Nations documents. To establish the International Criminal Court, which happened just 3 weeks ago, as I said. to review and take action on the Special Committee's report on changing the United Nations Charter to implement global governance.